This is Revolution News and Information. I am the gatekeeper. I have some interesting audio presented to me by my buddy. The guy's name's KW. His broadcast is on high frequency radio. The program tonight is going to be about the birth certificate and the government agencies. Excellent information. If you look into it, you'll see that he goes through what your parents did unknowingly, registering you with the government as a corporation by receiving and signing the birth certificate. And did you know that in a few years your corporation will receive a taxpayer ID number called a Social Security number? Listen to more of this program. You'll get some great intel from it, so please enjoy.
Looks like I'm missing one party. Hold on a second. Let me just get one more party on here. I know what happened here. Oh, he may have decided not to go on. Great, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm here.
Did Richard say he was going to be a part of the group?
I didn't hear. I thought he did.
I did too.
Well, thank you. When we're talking about all the legal problems that we're having, all legal problems come from legal obligations. And usually a default, a breach, or an omission of some obligation is what gets you wrapped up with the man. You know, and we all know. I should go ahead and start with the birth certificate and go from there. What it is, what your relationship to it is, how they got you tied into it, what you can do to separate yourself from that society and those legal relationships, okay? And I'll go ahead and start with the birth certificate. The birth certificate, I've listened to a lot of people, YouTube, talk shows and everything, but I never found out what was going on, so I stopped listening to them, and I started watching lawyers and judges and watching their classes. You know, a judge, he has to go to school too. They teach him about jurisdiction, and they have videos of these gentlemen giving classes and teaching judges about jurisdiction. All right, and if you'd like to check some of that stuff out, type in federal judicial television work. They have some on YouTube, and they have some on some other websites. But if you really want to find out what's going on and how this stuff really works, you know, my advice to everyone on this call is stop listening to your average Joe and go listen to the professionals. Then you'll grasp an understanding of what's going on. There for a long time, I went in court and tried all this crazy stuff, and it didn't really work all that well out for me. So, yeah, the television network. I tried some of the trust aspects, the beneficiary aspects, you know, those kinds of things, and claiming sovereignty, and it never got me nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. That's when I started to listen to the judges and lawyers, and this is where I started discovering very important facts about how the world works today, how we got here. All right. I started listening to these lawyers and judges. Well, that's when I was sitting there listening to a couple of judges, a couple of law professors, attorneys start talking about the birth certificate. This is when I discovered about what the birth certificate was, and after a few experiments, I narrowed it down to what the birth certificate is and what it represents. Now that I know these things, everything makes so much sense to me, why they do what they do, when they do it, and how they get away with it, okay? Yes, it is all by consent, just that they created a matrix in which they tied you to, and you had no idea about what was really going on with that original document, that original instrument, which, by the way, is called a matrix. This is when I discovered what the birth certificate was, and the birth certificate is this, and always refer to it as this. Don't call it a trust. Don't call it an estate. Don't call it none of that crap, all right, because it's not. What the birth certificate is, a public record showing the organization was organized, showing that it exists, that it has legal existence. This organization is a state agency. The way this come about was due to some trickery based on that original instrument. when we talk about the infant of unknown parentage being found, and if you go to Kentucky Revised Statute 213.051, you will read the contents of the birth certificate. And if you want to know what's on your birth certificate, go look at KRS 213.051. Most other states will have that same identical language, or pretty close, but usually I've seen a couple of them under the title head foundlings. I'm not going to go get into all that crazy stuff because that's some deep stuff, and that could take, that takes weeks to hammer out all the issues that got us to where we are. And I think the most important thing is some of the easier and more obvious aspects to this, which we overlook because we want to go over here and play and over here run down the rabbit holes for trying to find a pot of gold, kind of speak. I think the more important thing is how do we fix it? This state agency is an entity, okay? And this is one of the next aspects that I learned about was entities. An entity is a person other than a natural person. You are not an entity in law, nor could you ever be. It is strictly an artificial person. And when I say artificial person, of course, that encompasses all artificial persons. Now, you've heard some people say that the birth certificate actually, or the straw man, is a corporation. This is not true. It acts more like a partnership, and there's all different kinds of other partnerships that go on. But the main thing is that we know that it's an entity. The next thing that I understood from these judges and lawyers, that the big thing to them was it's all about beating the trustee. That's who you are, and I'll explain it, but it's not a trustee like most people think, because a trustee could be a doorman whose only job is to open the door for the people going in and out the door. He's a trustee, but he has minimal obligations. And for that same hotel or for that same rental building, there may be a manager, and he's a trustee. But his duties incorporate a little bit more responsibilities. And at a higher level, you may even have a CEO of a property investment company who has even more responsibility, and he's a trustee. And another word that we can equate with trustee is agent, okay? And that's what I want to talk about now as we're talking about the entity. All entities must have a registered agent and a registered office in order to conduct commerce in your state. It's very important that you understand this right here because the entity can do no thing. It can't ride a bike. It can't drive a car. It can't fly. It can't read. It can't write. It can't see. It can't hear. It can do those things. All right? So that it must have an agent, and this agent can take many forms. It can take the form as an executor or as a trustee or guardian, any of these agents, all right? And this is with respect to anybody employed by or a fiduciary. All these are agents. There's agency is everywhere. The guy mopping at the McDonald's bathroom floor, he's an agent. The secretary behind the desk at the lawyer's office, she's an agent. Agency is everywhere. Agents are everywhere. And it's very important to understand this because without agents, the entity could do no thing. Let me recap real quick from the beginning, all right, with the birth certificate. The birth certificate is a public record showing the organization was organized, showing it exists, that it has a name and has legal existence. The legal name of that registered organization is what you refer to your all capital letter name or the name that's on your certification of birth. The person that this certificate represents is an entity. And we can argue over whether it's a trust, an estate, or whatever. But the main important thing here is to remember that it is an entity. Now, me personally, I know for a fact that mine represents, well, it's not my birth certificate, but the certificate of birth that I have represents a state agency, and I take that from the account from findings by the court, statements made by professionals. But it's very important to understand that this entity exists. And you have an ace in the hole. And this is one thing that you can prove And this is the only reason you should produce that birth certificate in a court, is when you want to prove the organization was organized. That's all that document does. We can speculate, if there's some pot of gold behind it, but from everything I know, that's not true, but that doesn't mean you can't get paid for your operation of the state agency. We have this entity represented by this certificate issued by a state, what we refer to as a state. And this is another thing. A lot of people think that the states went corporate. All the states turned into corporations. This isn't true. The de jure states still exist, and their offices are filled. It's just that when we view the all capital letter part of the state of California, or here in Kentucky, it's the Commonwealth of Kentucky. This is actually a private company under the executive branch of Kentucky and is incorporated in Kentucky. So this Commonwealth of Kentucky, the state of Ohio, this all capital letter corporate fiction that you're talking about, is a private company created under the executive branch of government, and it operates like a business trust and a bankrupt estate. If you go do some research about bankrupt estates, you'll see that the probated estate works just like a business trust. A business trust is where property is conveyed to managers as principals who are to manage the property for the benefit of the cestui trust or beneficiaries, whom are given certificates. This entity, the all capital letter state, this is what operates under for the bankruptcy and operates in the commercial world. The de jure state still exists, but there's probably very few people who actually are freeholders and actual landowners. Everybody else is holding copyholds or leaseholds. When you're looking at the entity, it's very important to understand your relationship to it, and we'll talk about that now. This legal entity must have an agent. If you go look at any of your statutes, United States Code, here in Kentucky, it's under 14A. If you go look at it, read through those statutes, it's not a very large section. It'll probably take you about an hour. But you'll understand and grasp the concept of how you fit into all this. All right? Because for any entity to do business here in Kentucky, must have a registered agent and a registered office in order to conduct commerce in this state. And it's illegal for an entity to do commerce in the state without first doing the necessary prerequisite requirements. If you go to Kentucky Revised Statute 189.010, this has to deal with motor vehicles, and this is the term definitions. If you go there and look up the definition of vehicle, it says vehicle includes all agencies for the transportation of persons or property over upon the highway, which is a curious term, and it goes on. It says motor vehicle means all vehicles as described in paragraph 8. So when you're out there and you get a speeding ticket, you get a traffic ticket, you get a seatbelt ticket, a turn signal ticket, what they are actually doing is the offense is a result of you operating an agency, okay? You're not operating a car or an automobile or your whatever you want to call it. It comes strictly from operating an agency, all right? So what agency are you operating? This is the entity represented by the birth certificate. Now I'll talk about how you became to be the registered agent for service or process for the entity. And you did this when you took the birth certificate down to the Department of Motor Vehicles or the Department of Transportation, DMV, whatever you call it in your state, which is actually the Department of Commerce. And what you're actually doing is you're going down and you're saying, you're putting your birth certificate on the table there, along with the insurance card. You're applying for a license to operate a motor vehicle. It's to operate the entity. So you put your birth certificate up there, and you're proving to the Department of Commerce, hey, this entity exists. You put your Social Security card or your Social Insurance card up there, and you're also saying, I also enjoy limited liability. What this does is they'll take it, they'll go back, and they'll run it through, and if everything's good, they will issue you a license. And now you are licensed and authorized to conduct commerce here in Kentucky, in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. This legal person, like I said, you're the agent. You're the one going around doing business, and it's his name, and it's not yours. I want to try to explain it to people like this. It's kind of like using someone else's vessel, and that's exactly what it is. It's this entity is a vessel and instrumentality of the United States. It is what we refer to as a United States person or United States citizen. It is an entity, and it too has status. It has a jurisdiction of organization. And when I say that, what I'm talking about is under what law was that entity organized? Because that's the law who's it subject to, that entity is subject to. So if I created an entity in Ohio under Ohio law, that entity is governed by those laws. If I created an entity in the United States and the entity was created under the laws of the United States, that entity is governed by the laws of the United States. And it doesn't make a difference if you're in another state or not. It's irrelevant. Depending on the jurisdiction of the organization, this will determine the body of law governing proceedings. Let me talk about the position of registered agent for a minute. The registered agent for an entity, and if I wanted to sue someone, whether it be a state agency, a county agency, or maybe a private company, or whatever the entity may be. If I want to sue this entity, I have to comply with service of process. And anytime an entity gets sued, the registered agent is... let me go back to where you put the birth certificate on the table and you signed that to get that license. When you signed that license and you received it, what you actually did is accept appointment for service of process for that entity. You just became the registered agent for that entity for any service of process, notice, or demand, and your domicile or your place of abode just became the registered office for that entity. And like I said, this entity is depending on what law, this is why some things are different for some other people and their status as far as birth certificates go. If your birth certificate falls under the contents of birth certificate, like it says there, in 213.051, well, you're automatically, this entity is created. A citizen of the United States is created for you because you have no person. You're an infant of unknown parentage. If you're an infant of unknown parentage, who are you going to inherit from? If you're an infant of unknown parentage, can you be the posterity of the people? If you're of unknown parentage and someone found you, you're bankrupt. Once this information and accusations is made, it sets an operation of law starts rolling. And it's all based on this, what we could call false information. All right, we get back to the birth certificate and the registered agent. The registered agent, once he's accepted the appointment for service of process, and you could do this many ways. You could do it by signing up to vote, registering to vote. You could do it by signing your name just about in any of the registers using that certificate. And this is what gets you gets you to accept service of process for that entity. So when the cops come up to you and they ask you, or they got papers for you, they want to serve you process. Well, the reason they're bringing, and most people are like, hey, man, that ain't me, Well, no, but you are the registered agent, and the law says you have to accept service of process. And this is why they're bringing that paperwork to you, because you are the registered agent for service of process, notice, and demand for that entity. And your obligations as that registered agent is very minuscule. And it's just like any other company if you think about it. If you wanted to sue Walmart, you have to serve process to the registered agent for Walmart in that region, county, district, or whatever. You have to find out who the registered agent is. If you wanted to sue a Cabinet for Health and Family Services, you need to know who the registered agent is for service process. If you wanted to sue a company or an instant franchise, such as McDonald's, you need to know who the registered agent for service of process is in that entity. And now I want you to put your place sit you in the place of the registered agent for Walmart or White Castle or this suit shop. That way, it doesn't make a difference as long as it's an entity. If you was working for Walmart and you was the registered agent and Walmart gets sued and the court brings you the paper suing you, what do? We most certainly wouldn't show up to court and try to handle Walmart's business, would we? This is why your obligation as registered agent for service process notice of demand for that entity is very minuscule, and it's twofold, and you can find that also in Kentucky Revised Statute 14A. Your obligation and duty as registered agent is this: to forward to the entity for which you are the registered agent any service of process, notice, or demand on the entity's behalf. When they bring you the paperwork, your obligation is to take that service of process or that notice or that demand. If somebody's demanding money or they're giving you notice or legal notice or notice of this or notice of that, and it's addressed in that name of that entity, what you need to do is forward to the entity any service of process, notice, or demand received on its behalf, and let them have their legal department take care of it, just like Walmart would do. If you were served and Walmart was getting sued and you were the registered agent, well, you wouldn't go in court and handle it yourself. You would send it to the chief executive office and let them handle it, and they'll get the professionals on it. And while this is what we're supposed to be doing, this is not what we're doing. We're going into court and hollering all kinds of crazy silliness. Well, we need to address quite simply what is going on with that birth certificate and your relationship to it, and why those names are being used, and why we have all the different variations of the outcomes of courts when we go in and try these different things. And I base my beliefs on what I know. I don't know based on my beliefs. So I like to know something before I start basing my beliefs. And everything tells me, and this is the evidence, and I could spend probably 3 hours here talking about all the experiences, but I do have it on court record that the judge entered a finding that I was operating a state agency, and that was under a driving suspension charge. I also have it on statement from the circuit court clerk that it is a state agency. Numerous times on the lawyers and judges, while speaking to each other or giving lectures, have always referred to that birth certificate as a public record showing the organization is organized. For me, it's easy, because I know what the birth certificate is. I know what my relationship to it was, and I knew how to sever that relationship through a declaratory judgment. And that's another thing I'll address real quickly, is that if you have an interest in any instrument, and that birth certificate is an instrument. As a matter of fact, I was standing in family court one time, and they referred to the birth certificate as the governing instrument. Well, I know what a governing instrument is. If you yourself have any questions or uncertainty or confusion about your rights, whether they're affected by the statute, government regulations, or code, or if you're interested in a deed, an instrument, or in the estate of another or a relative, this is where the declaratory judgment comes in. And originally in 1922, and again in, I think, 1938, it's a uniform law passed. And if you go look it's in the U.S. Code, it's federal, it's state, it's local. And the whole reason was they put this declaratory judgment was so to settle any uncertainties or any doubts or misconceptions about what your legal duties and obligations are. Or if you've been concerned with the legal relationship between you and another person, you can go to court and have a declaratory judgment. After I got to a certain point, after I had run my experiments, observed, theorized again, run experiment, observed, theorized again, run experiment, observed, and after a certain amount of times, you keep on coming up and you're able to predict what happens. And that's why I can say with certainty that birth certificate and that entity that we're talking about that it represents is a state agency. And you can call it a taxpayer, you can call it a vessel, you can call it a vehicle, you can call it all the wonderful names that they tie up to it. Okay. But when you go into court, what you want to say is, the term you want to use is, for that birth certificate, is I have the public record showing the organization was organized. So if any of y'all are interested, check out the declaratory judgment. You got any questions? That's the way to go about it. Hey, Judge, I got a birth certificate here. He told me that that if I wanted to terminate an agency, that the resignation is the way to go. That ain't the exact words he put it, but just gave me a bone right there. Well, that's when I learned how to sever yourself from the legal entity that we all have problems with. You've heard other people say, well, you're the beneficiary, not the trustee. Well, see, that's the case in the hole that you have, is that you can prove the entity exists. The question is it your entity? And the answer is no. But you're using it. And think of it as using a ship or a vessel. And that's exactly how it works. If you borrow my vessel to go do commerce, whose rules do you have to follow? The whole ideal is to separate yourself from the legal relationships that you have with the so-called state, which really isn't the state. It's the private company under the executive branch of government is what it is. After I got my declaratory judgment, I discovered how to file and sever that legal relationship and claim back my free man status. And that's what it's all about, the status. When they pull you over and they ask you for that ID, the only thing they want that ID for is that they want to determine your status. I discovered that all you have to do is send a statement of resignation to the Secretary of State saying that you will no longer accept service of process or notice of demand on behalf of that entity and that you are discontinuing the registered office. To me, that was it. I haven't had no problem since, even though I've had plenty of run-ins with them. And where I used to always go to jail, I don't go to jail no more. So that's where I'm at, and I was able to do that. And I did that with full understanding. But I don't advise anybody just to do this. I advise them to understand what's going on and what the consequences are of severing that legal relationship. But after I did this, and I've studied more and more things come about me, become known to me, I would have done it a little bit different. And this is what I've come up with, and this, I got 10 points, 10 things you have to do, and to be able to enjoy your free man status, and with a little luck and a little God's blessing, that you'll have a nice little hunk of change when it's all said and done. All right, so you've been operating this agency for, in my case, was 40 years. All right, I don't ever recall being paid for that. So I want you to take this agent / trustee / seaman. All right, whenever I say agent, trustee, or seaman, I mean the same thing, okay, because they're all the same thing in respects to vessel. I'm just going to read the 10 simple sentences, and then we'll stop, and we'll let you go ahead and start on some questions, all right? 1, here's the first step you take. You create your own certificate and counter deed via United States Code Section 1746, and that's Title 28, for the purposes of defeating the matrix and their certificate. The second thing you do is you send a bill to the Chief Executive Office along with the affidavit of claim of right, and you also sign it under U.S. Code Title 28, 1746, Section 1. And when they don't pay the bill, you send the past due notice. When that is expired, now you go file what's called an agent's lien. This is the fourth step. You go file an agent's lien. Once you file the agent's lien, you can file an agent's lien on all your property that you have in your possession, including any land, whether it's movable or immovable, tangible or intangible, anything in your possession in the name of that agency. As agent, you can lien until the principal pays the bill. And the state, i.e. the United States, is the principal. You're the agent. Here's another little interesting thing about the law of agency. An agent must report back to his principal annually to report on how the business is doing and to settle up his franchise fees. So when you fill out your income tax, that's what you're doing. You, the agent, are filing and giving notice to the principal how the business is going for the use of his vessel, and he'll take his cut, and if you're owed a little bit back, blah, blah, blah. All right, so we're going, number 5. We're going to send, after we file the agent's lien, we're going to send a statement of resignation to the Secretary of State resigning the appointment of the registered agent for service of process for the entity and discontinue the registered office. 6, the next thing you want to do is notify the other appropriate agencies as advised by your Secretary of State. If you go on the Secretary of State page, you'll see on there how they other agencies which you should notify when you resign from being a registered agent. And some of these are the IRS, the Department of Transportation or Commerce, and there's like 3 or 4 more that you have to notify to make sure that you have no other legal obligations. Now, 7, after you've done this and you got yourself sitting back, you're holding all the cards. And remember, you have the ace in the hole because you know the entity exists. You can prove it. Here we go, 7. All right, what we're going to do is we're going to serve that entity, John Doe, through the CEO and Secretary of State, according to the provisions of the statute. And we're going to bring the suit in the name of John Doe, all lowercase, versus John Doe, all capitalized. And you're going to bring an action for unpaid bill, constructive fraud, violation of the statutes and code, and a declaratory judgment seeking redress of injuries and loss and compensation for energy and value provided, value taken. Let me stop right there for 1 second. Let me explain that concept there. Is that when a seaman is the paramount creditor to the vessel, and he is to be paid before anybody else is. Before anybody settles up, any creditors get paid, the seaman gets paid. The agent gets paid, especially when you're talking about vessels and interstate commerce. Well, let me go ahead and move on to A. After you serve John Doe, the entity, through the Secretary of State and the CEO, and you comply with the proper provisions regarding service of process for the entity, having no registered agent and no registered office no more, there are certain provisions that have to be, steps that have to be taken in order to accomplish proper service of process upon the entity, which is located at the Chief Executive Office. 8, now, once you serve these papers and everything, one of 2 things is going to happen. Either someone's going to show up in court, or no one will. Me personally, I suspect no one will. But if someone does show, you now know they represent the other party to the agency. And now you have someone to talk to about what the hell is going on. They may be willing to put up a fight, so you have to be prepared to go to trial if there is someone that shows up and decides to represent that legal entity you thought was you. After we got the service process, we go to court. This is if someone shows up, of course, now you know who the other party is. Now we go on to 9. Well, what happens if no one shows up? Well, this is the best thing that can happen to you. This would be the best thing to happen in your life. Well, not necessarily, but one of the best things you would happen in your life when it comes to the legal system. Because if no one shows up, I get a default judgment. I get a default judgment entered against the defendant for the unpaid bill, and I have legitimate footing and argument to do what I just did. I proved that entity exists. What are you talking about? Once you've gotten the default judgment and the court to enter the default judgment into the records, now you could use that judgment to start seizing assets in order to pay your bill. When you do have that, you actually get to use the courts and sheriffs to go get your property back. Now, that's the 10 steps, and after you take those 10 steps, you can enjoy your free man status and your financial freedom. And I'll go ahead and stop right there and let you guys.
Hey, before you ask any questions, I wanted just to spur you on one more time before we get into digging everybody's deals. When you said, letter of resignation to the Secretary of State, would you do that to the birth state or to the state you happen to be inhabiting?
It would be what's on the birth certificate.
Okay.
And you would do it with the state.
So both.
Where you're in.
Would you do with any state that you might have done business?
Yes.
Second question. Why don't you tell your court story? Remember the court story we were talking about on the call the other day? Where you walked in there and sent you notice of not appearing in any representative capacity?
Oh, yeah. Let me address that aspect.
Could you tell me if this is before or after you sent your letter of resignation, the story you're getting ready to tell?
This was after.
Okay, so you've already, at this particular time, you sent a letter of resignation of being the registered agent for the registered organization.
Right.
Okay.
I think it was maybe like 2 months after that.
Okay.
Because ever since that court date, I haven't had one problem out of these people, even though I've had plenty of contact with them. The whole thing about going into court is what capacity you're in there as. When we go into court there, we're already presumed to be in there in a representative capacity. And this is one of the issues that if you listen to the judges, attorneys, and lawyers and law professors talk long enough, you'll understand this, is that they have a whole doctrine called, well, if it's not raised, then it's waived doctrine, okay? And they actually refer to it as that. If the issue is not raised, then it's waived. And so when you go into court, you're actually going in there in a representative capacity, and that's the presumption. And since there was no issue raised about it, they're continuing upon that issue. This applies to civil proceedings and also criminal proceedings. Although the criminal proceedings are a little bit more complicated and technical, the whole thing is a representative capacity, and I'm sure Brian could attest to that if he's on here. So when I go into court and I'm acting in a representative capacity, am I sovereign? The answer is no. You're there in a representative capacity, standing in a place for another, or acting as agent for him. Let me go ahead and point out, I'm sure some people have seen that video where it says judge bows to sovereign, and I guess the guy goes up there in front of the judge, and there's a big hold down, bailiffs come up to him and everything. Well, if you go watch that video, you'll see that the judge throws the guy a bone. He says, you are either him or you are his agent. And he said it to him twice. But the boy didn't understand. He didn't get it. This is very important whenever you go into court, is that you always file a notice to appear by special appearance in a non-representative capacity. Always.
Okay, do you have a template of something that you used on that regard? Or?
No, the court has forms. I just used the form the court had.
There's a form that for that particular reason on Kentucky's webpage?
Yes, notice to appear. And if you've already been to court at some pre-trial or pre-hearing, arraignment hearing or something like that, you want to withdraw your appearance in a representative capacity and then file another notice to appear in a non-representative capacity. Because what this does, it throws a monkey wrench the size of an aircraft carrier into the works. Because no longer is the capacity to sue and be sued determined by the law of the organization's jurisdiction. The capacity to sue and be sued is determined by the law of your domicile. I always like to say, the law of my domicile says, FO. And that's the whole thing about being in a representative capacity. And you can find that in Rule 17B of the Federal Rules of Procedure. And most states have adopted the federal civil rules of procedure, so not all of them, but most. When we're talking about going into court in a non-representative capacity, okay, the last time I was in court dealing with this, it was for driving under suspension and no insurance, blah, blah, blah. When I went into court, I, of course, filed my paperwork to notice to appear in non-representative capacity, and when I got up there, I stated that in court, I'm here in a non-representative capacity, by special appearance to challenge the jurisdiction of this court. And got quiet for a second, and the judge goes, well, what do you want to do about jurisdiction? And I said, well, for starters, Judge, I'd like to know the names and nationalities and citizenships of all the participants in these proceedings. And you talk about the head whipping going on then, the judge looked over at the clerk looked over at the prosecutor looked over at me, And, the judge, he's sitting there quiet. It was good 3-4 minutes. And he looks at me and he says it just like this. This is a quote. Well, what do you want me to do about me not having jurisdiction? Of course, I moved for dismissal. The courtroom looked stunned. The judge's eyes got big. There was about another minute of silence and fake paper looking for, and then next thing you know, the judge says dismiss and walks out of the courtroom. And that was my last experience in the court. Well, I just had another incident today. A friend of mine got arrested last night while he was riding on his motorcycle with no turn signals. He gets pulled over and they run his name. Well, come to find out he's got 2 warrants on him from Ohio for 2 child support, for 2 counts of child support that he supposedly owes. I was busy last night. I couldn't get to him, but early this morning, I had the daughter go down and have her see him because it's just a little small deal, ain't a big old thing. But and had him sign a statement appointing me as the executive of his state and his attorney in fact, having all powers. And after I had that, I went into the sheriff's office to address my issues, and I stated that my friend was being held due to a case of mistaken identity. After sitting there talking about him, I remember at one point he says, well, You know your shit. After talking to him about 15, 20 minutes, talking about the entity, and you know, my friend is not the registered agent, nor is he the trustee for that entity. You know as well as I do, Sheriff, that's an entity. Well, he said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll call the county attorney and I'll get back with you. And this was about 9:30 or so. Well, he was released at 10:50. And all he's got to do is go back and address the driving without license and turn signal. He doesn't even have the child support thing no more. Which on the 23rd, I'll be happy to go in there and handle my principal's business.
You're going to be in a representative capacity in that particular one?
He's going to be in a non-representative capacity, and I'm going to be there as the executor of his estate and his authorized representative and attorney in fact.
So you'll be in a representative capacity then?
Yes.
That's what
I will be the agent. And that's exactly what you do when you hire an attorney. It's what an attorney is. You turn over rights and powers to him so that he can be your authorized representative and act in your stead. Now, my friend, he isn't the smartest guy, but he's a good guy. And this is going to be very simple. He's not required to have a driver's license. Like I say, he's not operating an agency. And I'm pretty sure that's probably going to get dismissed before we even get there.
Has this man done any kind of reservation, or this is, you said he hasn't, correct?
No. This guy, he's not your normal guy. He's a peculiar breed. He's never accepted appointment for service of process for that entity, so he's never had a reason to resign here in Kentucky.
But he has done it in other states?
No, he hasn't done anything.
No, I'm saying he is accepted as a registered agent in other states?
Well, I'm sure he would be in Ohio if he hasn't. See, because this is the whole thing. When you go and clear out this entity, because me, myself, I'm trying to find out who the other partner is to this entity, all right? Specifically, I'm presuming the United States, okay? And that's a presumption on my part, and I have plenty of circumstantial evidence which backs me up on that. But however, I cannot say with 100% certainty that that entity was created under the laws of the United States. It may have been created under the laws of some other jurisdiction. And the whole thing to remember about the state agency and the operation of it is this, is that if a corporation is bankrupt or if a government is bankrupt, are its agencies bankrupt?
Yes.
Now, do you see why they refer to you as the debtor in possession, the trustee of the estate of the agency? Which, by the way, is your human capital, your energy and value and skill and actually, they refer to it, and I actually have the document. Anyways, it's a document issued by the Commonwealth of Kentucky, United States, and it actually has the organization name there of the boy, who's, you know, the all capital letter name, and relationship to that organization actually lists the boy as the commercial and industrial machinery and equipment, or the capital goods used in the production of other goods and services, and that's how it works. But see, the thing is that you can get rid of it at any time you'd like, but you have to follow the proper steps to get rid of it. You can't just say, oh, I'm done with it. It doesn't work like that. You'll still have problems. But, see, a lot of people call it the do not detain list. It's not the do not detain list. It's the out of our jurisdiction list. And I'll point to Hollins versus Byers, or Briars, I think it is, here in Kentucky, which this Baptist church had been informed for 140 years. At some point, they decided to incorporate and form a nonprofit corporation. There were some issues about how some of the elected people were elected, and it went to court. And make the long story short, the court said this. He said for 140 years, the church did business and the state could not interfere. But as soon as it incorporated, it became subject to the laws. And he referred to it as this. He said, when it decided to enter the realm of Caesar, it must follow the law of Caesar, or, as in this case, the statutes of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So here we have a judge referring and comparing the realm of Caesar to the statute of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And he's absolutely right. A lot of people say these judges are crazy and they don't know what they're doing. I'm telling you, man, these guys are brilliant. These guys ain't stupid. These guys ain't no joke. Just because you don't understand what's going on, and you go in there hollering about the Constitution, I would be the same way. If I was sitting on that bench, I'd tell you to sit down and shut up. If I hear that word Constitution come out of your mouth one more time, I'm going to put you in jail. because this has nothing to do with the Constitution. This has to do with being this entity here and operating a state agency. So I got an agency over here, being the county or a municipal corporation or a political subdivision. I got an agency over here, and I got another state agency here over here on the other side as defendant. I got an agency here, and I got an agency here. Guess who's got administrative jurisdiction?
My question is how do you view your Social Security number?
Well, I would call the birth certificate a mark, and it is a mark. It is the evidence, proof, and token of a thing done, of a fact. Have the legal name of the organization, of an organization, and we have numbers associated with the organization. As far as I'm concerned with the Social Security number, I don't use it, and I never will again. To me, it's the mark, the name, and the number of the beast. The Bible tells you what's up if you know what words, if you're real versed in legal terms.
Right.
You go read the Bible again in those legal terms, man, with those legal meanings, that Bible brings on a whole new thing, because Jesus himself was born an illegitimate child of unknown parentage.
You're talking my language, but now my question is, how are you operating for example, I haven't used the Social Security number since 1988. Typically, I've never had a problem getting a bank account or anything else like that. I'm a notary public for the state of Texas without a Social Security number. I've got a Texas ID. I don't have a Texas driver's license because I don't use a driver's license. I have one from overseas, a foreign driver's license.
When you go to work for somebody and you become an employee, or maybe you're suffered to be employed, this creates an agency, your master, principal being your employer, and the employee being you, being the agent. Now, your duties and obligations under that would be depending on whatever consisted of the agreement. As far as using the Social Security number, I know for a fact that you don't need a Social Security number to get a license. And at this time, I want to point out another little interesting fact. Okay, and I learned this from the Inspector General report from the Cabinet for Health and Family, or Department of Health and Family Services, or Human Service, whatever it's called, issued by, I think her name was Debbie Lee Gibson or Don Lee Gibson or something like that back in 2000, and where the commission had come up in 3 separate reports by these commissions and investigations into the birth certificate. They concluded that 100% of all federal fugitives are associated with false identification. So your question would be, how do I fix this? How am I able to operate within their system, or at least have commercial transactions with them without using their vessel? Is that pretty much what you're asking? How could I do it without using their vessel and legally tying it to them?
That's exactly what I'm asking, but I'm asking it from two perspectives. One is I've got two of my youngest children, 22 and 20. Both have no Social Security numbers and both have no birth certificate issued by the state. How do they get a job?
Easy. Yeah, you can. If you go look at United States Code, Title 28, I believe it's 1746, there's a little statement in there, and if you put that on your paper, this gives the like, same, and force effect to any registrar certificate or anything. You could create your own, and it has the same like, force, and effect. Read it 3 or 4 times so you get a good grasp of what it says there, because you can create your own certificate, and it has the same like, force, and effect as the registrar's.
All right, same birth certificate, you mean?
Well, no. Of course, you would want to make your certificate not say you were born in the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
Right.
I was born upon the land commonly called Kentucky, the dark and bloody ground. And I told the cop one time, I said, "Nah, man, I was born on this dark and bloody ground."
What about the job, though? What about going to the bank and opening a bank account?
Well, this is what I'm saying. This is when you start operating in your private capacity. They cannot prevent you from doing this. You can create your own legal entity, and this is what I would prefer advise everyone to do, because, see, the entity that you're operating now has another partner in it. There's another interested party in that entity, that organization, or else it wouldn't be an organization, it'd be an individual. What you want to do is start operating your own individual entity where nobody else is a party to it. So this way, you keep your entity separate from their debts and obligations. You see, the United States and its state agencies are all bankrupt, and when you use their vessel and their instruments, you're subject to their rules and regulations. And that's because it's a partnership, and I've heard it referred to the judges by that. If it's not a corporation, there's really two classes, and with exceptions to corporations, all other entities are to be treated like partnerships because they really are partnerships, whether it's a limited liability company, a trust, or how all these things are done. These are types of partnerships, and the feds look at it like that. If it's not a corporation, then you treat it like a partnership. And this is a partnership, a franchise, an enterprise created by the United States for people, paupers, 14th Amendment, New Deal stuff,
Right.
This is the New Deal. The New Deal was, hey, you operate an agency. Now, you can create your own idea. This is what it's talking about, make your own name. Everybody knows me by KW. And people keep on calling me Ken W. I think maybe they made a mistake. I'm called KW. And I'm making my own name. All right? Everybody I do business with know me as KW. I'm making my own name. This has nothing to do with them. It's private. And that's the way I like to keep it. And once you sever your legal relationship and you're no longer operating that state agency and occupying the trustee's office for that entity, now you're back over here in the private. Now the rules and stuff don't apply to you when apply to their entities and agencies. And as far as creating your own, maybe getting a license, now I haven't done this, but I have no reason to believe that it wouldn't work. And that's to create your own certification of birth and put your own place down there and spell your name how you want it to. They've made their claim about how to spell your name and what your name is and where you was born or found and birthed and who was your mother. Now you go make your claim. Now when you fill out that certificate and you use United States Code 28-1746, your certificate is to be given the same like, force, and effect as their certificate.
And where are you filing or recording that certificate?
Well, you would make your certificate and you would take it down to wherever you want to get your license, along with your affidavit saying you ain't using no numbers. You're not a number. It's just your religious beliefs.
Now, what about a job?
Well, once you have the license, that's going to be no problem, right? That's what I'm saying. You could take, when you go down there to the DMV and whatever, when you put your certificate on the table there, you get a license to do business in the Commonwealth. Follow me?
Okay.
All right. Well, instead of putting their certificate and their person up there and being the registered agent, well, you can put your entity up there. You can put your own up there. And what this does, it creates a legal relationship between you and the state, but it's your entity. It's not subject to. It's a private thing. You see what I'm saying? It's not tied to them.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, so it's not subject to their reorganization and their bankruptcy. You're over here in private. And this is how a lot of people operate. This is why some people think people have different statuses. They do. In my declaratory judgment, the judge stated that I am a private citizen. And that's the way I like it.
Explain to me how you do that same process. I'm assuming you do that same process with a bank to go get a bank account?
Sure. Once you've been authorized by the state to conduct commerce, you can go do the bank and whatever. Now keep in mind, as long as you stay within that state and you don't have any business or trade or commerce or any state commerce or trade between any other state, as long as you stay within that state, Congress can't touch you. But as soon as you enter into a commercial transaction or interstate commercial transaction or international commercial transaction, Congress has jurisdiction over those persons engaged in international interstate commerce. One of those things. But here's another thing. Is once you've separated and made yourself private, there's nothing that says you can't go create your own entity and your own organization and do business in. This is what the rich people do. This is what they mean when they refer to in the Constitution as a man and his persons. Now, you can have many persons. Me, myself, I got about 6.
the registered agent is the dude that gets service the process.
Mm-hmm.
And,
yep.
Something about the chief executive office.
All right. Well, let me explain how you determine where this entity is located. There's laws that determine all this stuff, and it's very important to understand that any action regarding a security interest in property is governed by Article 9 of the Uniform Commercial Code. Period. Right. With other laws supplementing Article 9. The reason the entity is located at the Chief Executive Office, which would be the Chief Executive Office of all capital letters named state, usually your governor wears the same hat. You know, the different hats. One CEO, one is Chief Magistrate. The rules which determine where an entity is located and where to serve him is such as this. It says an organization that has more than one place of business is located at its chief executive office. Now, you didn't issue those financial instruments that's traded on the stock market and those mutual funds, did you?
No, we did not, Ken.
That's right. So now we know this state agency, this organization, has more than one place of business. Now, me personally, I've tracked it down. I know who issues the birth certificates here in Kentucky. It's called the Jefferson County Children's Home. I actually tied that bond straight to BlackRock Investments out of London, England, who is an investment management group for Wells Fargo, who's the one that actually holds the bond in the mutual fund. And what it is, you've always heard them refer to, we need to invest in children. Well, that's what they're doing, and they're doing so through this enterprise, this franchise called the state agency. So the entity is located at the Chief Executive Office. The Chief Executive Office, if it was done underneath the laws of the United States, well, that, of course, would be Barack Obama. And, yes, he is the debtor. Everything I've seen says all debts and obligations are debts and obligations of the United States. And I believe that to be correct. But consider the entity was created under those laws. The entity, John Doe, is located at its Chief Executive Office, but it has a registered office located in your state doing business in his name. Does that make sense? Yes. The entity is actually a citizen of the United States and domiciled and a citizen resident of the United States, which, by the way, is located where?
District of Columbia.
Gotcha, boss. I just can't make the statement that every birth certificate was created under the laws of the United States. I have good reason to believe that some were created under the laws of the state, in which case that Chief Executive Office would apply.
Ken, do you have any kind of a templated thing we can look at to create our own agent's lien, for example?
Well, you can use a UCC-1 for an agent's lien, and if you're not familiar with an agent's lien, sometimes it's more commonly known as a mechanic's lien. Except at this point, let's say you're my principal and I'm your agent, right? And I'm operating this agency called Verizon in a little kiosk at a mall. I'm the agent for Verizon. I have a little agency set up in the mall. And let's say one day I send my bill to you and you don't pay my bill. Now I have all this phones and stuff here that's part of the estate of the agency. The law of agency and the law allows me, if you don't pay me what you owe me as my principal, then I am allowed to lien everything, all the property of the agency in my possession. So in your case, it would be your house, your car, anything that's have a value and has a title. Because remember, because all that stuff is in whose name?
The entity.
That's right, and all that stuff is what makes up the estate of the state agency for which the United States borrows against. They actually do commercial transactions based on the estate of the agency and the shit that you work for. See, because they can actually put down as the collateral of its agency or of its child agency, and them being the parent, they could actually borrow against their assets, and that's what they do. This is how they fund government. They borrow against your home and against your car and against your property and against your sweat and against your children. And this is why I'm a big disbeliever in this whole trust and estate and pot of gold. Make no mistake about this, all right? This is my opinion, and I base this opinion on what I know. These people don't give a flying shit about us. They do not care enough about you to create a trust for you so that one day if you figured it out, you might become rich. These people don't give a shit about you, but they do have to follow the law. And this is where the admiralty comes in. This is why all the interstate, the New World Order and all this, because they're trying to turn everything over to commercial and corporations and allow the people who want to get out of it, get out of it. And you can get out of it. And you might be able to get your house all locked up and everything and not have to worry about paying for any other debts owed by the entity. But he's the debtor. Always was and always will be.
What's up with remember this thing about seamen and deck squads or whatever? They get paid first?
Yes.
Wouldn't we be able to maybe send a bill for wages? I mean...
Well, yeah, that's why I was talking about the 10-step way to do that. I've thought long and hard about this. I got a couple of guys just getting ready to implement it and start going on about it. And this is what I would have done if I know then what I know now. But I didn't know then what I know now, so I just went ahead and severed the relationship and no longer stepped in the service process. And the effect of this is that if you're no longer the agent for the service of process for that entity, can they serve you?
No. Insufficient service of process.
That's right. As a matter of fact, that's what the rules and that's what the statutes tell you, that if the agent for service of process has not accepted the appointment for service of process, the service of process is insufficient.
That happens to be one of the pre-trial motions prior to accepting jurisdiction. You can challenge jurisdiction for insufficient service of process.
Right. Well, if you've already resigned the agency, you just go in there and simply tell them you give them your certified copy that you sent to the Secretary of State, which is a statement of resignation and discontinuing of the registered office. That's all you need there. He'll have to go serve the Secretary of State because that's the proper statutory process for serving entities that no longer have registered agents. You serve the Secretary of State for that entity and the Chief Executive Office if it's from that state. As far as the seaman goes, you can look at these, all these things in pretty much like three different colors or different shades of law. The same story being told in the admiralty jurisdiction. Well, instead of you being the agent, you're the seaman. It's like looking through the business goggles, you're the agent. Looking through the trust goggles and trust law goggles, you're the trustee. Looking through the admiralty goggles, you're the seaman. Does that make sense? Now, when you bring the suit, John Doe versus John Doe, you're going to bring the suit in admiralty, in personam, and in rem. And you're going to save the suitor, you, all common law remedies available. You see what I'm saying? And it's called saving the suitors. I'm sure you've heard of it. So you're actually going to bring a admiralty suit as agent / trustee / seaman against the registered organization, the person, and the vessel. That's why the in rem, because you're also charging the estate of the agency, and the agency does have an estate. You're going to ask the court to save the suitors all remedies which are available and can be given by the common law. And that includes that unpaid bill, because you are going to send a bill to the Chief Executive Office for services rendered, compensation for legal representation and representation in commercial transactions. Then, of course, you need compensation for the operation of the agency itself. Then, of course, you're going to need reimbursement for the losses and damages that occurred while you were on your adventure. All these things come into play.
Looks like there's a question on the chat there. Someone, I guess, couldn't ask you. You see the last one there?
Let me see here.
If anyone has any experience with dealing with a probation situation, I would love to hear. Currently dealing with a probation situation I agreed to on the threat of jail and without counsel. I'd like any advice on correcting mistakes, since I now realize this probation contract is not written to benefit me in any way, laughing out loud.
The first thing you want is a controversy. If they're claiming that you're bound by this contract and these probation terms, and you say you're not, Is that a controversy? Well, that automatically gives you a right to declaratory judgment. There's a controversy here, and there's a dispute about who has rights and legal obligations, and I want to try to exercise what I believe to be my right, but they're threatening me. So I need a declaratory judgment, Judge. If I have to resign the appointment for the agency, I will. Because look at it this way. When the entity gets charged, let's say like the Bank of America, I'm sure you guys heard Bank of America was laundering like $850 million for drug cartels. When this happened and everything, whenever you hear one of these big entities, agents, get into trouble, what do? They resign, and you can too. It takes you out of their jurisdiction. You're no longer operating the person. You're no longer tied to them legally. You have no legal relationship. But make no mistake about this. This doesn't mean you get to go do whatever you want to do. This doesn't mean you're not subject to some of the provisions of the statutes. You are, and you will be. And as a matter of fact, I've heard some people talk about, well, I'll drive 100 miles an hour backwards down the road, and I'll tell that cop he better not stop me or bother me with my right or do anything like that. Well, the cop ain't going to have to stop you, because if you come 100 miles an hour driving backwards crazy up my road, I'm going to yank you out of that car, I'm going to arrest you, and I'm going to prosecute you. And you have that power too once you become a private citizen. All I got to do is witness a felony. All I have to do is believe the person I'm arresting committed a felony. I have the power to arrest. Doesn't make a difference who it is. Well, some stipulation on members of the legislature and judges and such. But your everyday normal public servant, if I see them committing a felony, I'm placing them under arrest. And that goes for crazy people talking about they don't have to follow the law too.
Yeah, what do you think? You didn't answer that one in regards to asked about the probation situation. Well,
there's a controversy here. And if you felt that you were threatened or coerced in there, what you need to do is bring a declaratory judgment seeking declaratory relief by voiding the probationary terms. And before I do that, bring that action, I would actually send that statement of resignation in.
That would be something that you would use as an exhibit for your declaratory judgment?
Yes, because, see, a trustee is an indispensable party to the proceedings. The court cannot proceed unless an agent's there, or a trustee, or somebody. It cannot proceed against the entity. There must be somebody there. This is why the court constantly referred to as the trustee being an indispensable party to the proceedings. The court can't proceed without the trustee, not when an entity's involved.
Question. If you are an agent,
there's actually not a controversy at the moment, because I'm walking the line, so to speak, and I want there to be a controversy, and just any pointers to how to bring that up. I made a mistake here, and I want to correct what I agreed to.
Well, sure there's a controversy. Well, do you believe what they're doing is infringing upon your rights?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, they don't.
How do I bring that to their attention?
One would say that you would give a short description of what's taken place, what got you to the point where you're at, and then you would give a little brief paragraph about why you think you're entitled to do this or that. State the fact that they don't agree with you.
Okay.
Now you have a controversy. And you could also use, here in Kentucky, it's chapter 418. And it, too, is an awful small chapter. I would advise you to go read it, or you could type in Declaratory Judgments Act PDF, either 1922, 1938. It's been codified in the federal United States Code and federal statutes, and it also has been adopted by all the states. So there is definitely a declaratory judgments chapter in your state. And just go read that, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Because anytime you're interested in a deed, a contract, a will, any kind of instrument, or that if your rights are being affected by a statute, a regulation, a code, or an ordinance, any of these things give you standing to bring a declaratory judgment. And, of course, you would go in there and say, well, Judge, I claim I have the right to make all this null and void. And if you go in there and declaratory judgment, and they say they don't argue with you, well, that's great. But, of course, there's a controversy, and, of course, they're going to say you can't do that. Well, then you need to be able to articulate your position and cite your evidence and your belief why you should be entitled to the declaratory relief that you are seeking, which would be the voiding and vacation of the probationary terms, right?
When you were saying write down the different points, that's actually for remain acting as judge, not through the probation officer?
Well, when you explain yourself in your paperwork for the declaratory?
Yeah.
Yeah, because he's going to be, believe it or not, man, I understand why all these people do what they do. It is all about business. Even when they take children, Health and Family Services, if you go look under Kentucky Rules of Procedure, Rule 89, you'll see that when they try to terminate a parent's rights, it's because it's in economic litigation, and the state is a creditor to the child, the state agency, and they're taking the estate of the agency, which is the child, the infant, because they have invested in children. And since they have invested, does that make them a creditor?
Yes.
Well, that's why they do it, because that's the only term they meet in the definition interested person. Here in Kentucky, only an interested person can bring a petition for custody of the child. So how is it that the Cabinet for Health and Family Services can do it? Because they are a creditor to the entity, and it's under Article 9. I actually had a woman I was helping with and talking to her attorney, and the attorney told her that, yes, that the abuse and neglect charge was actually being governed by Article 9 of the Uniform Commercial Code. It's all Uniform Commercial Code. I don't give a shit what anybody says. I've heard it come out of too many judges' mouths. There's one judge, he sits there, he's talking about when he first come out of law school, he goes, when I was a very young lawyer and I just got out of law school, the president of the local bar stopped me on the side of the road and asked if I would give a speech to the local bar about the Uniform Commercial Code because I was the only one who knew anything about it, and it was soon to come into effect in that state. He said, so I got up and I gave my speech to the local bar, and he said after I gave my speech, and an old judge in the background stood up and said, you people have repealed everything I know. And he's absolutely right, because I'm pretty sure that old judge knew all about the common law and the law that we like to call law. But the truth is all that's been repealed, and that's evidenced in Kentucky Revised Statutes under the statute generally, which says that the Kentucky Revised Statutes of 1942 are considered as a substitute for the laws of Kentucky. This is why you have substitute money. This is why you have a substitute law. And this is why you have a substitute person.
I just got a text from my soon-to-be ex saying that I was not any longer able to see my children until a custody plan was put into place.
The only they have jurisdiction over any of those children. Now, see, when you're getting into arguing with a woman, that's a whole different case. The circumstances change. The rules change. Exceptions change. And this is why somebody asks me what the answer to every legal question is, well, the answer to every legal question is, it depends. In your case, where is it your ex-wife or just ex-girlfriend?
Actually, my wife.
Okay. This is a little different thing because you actually have another party, not an entity, who's an interested party. It's been appointed. I'm guessing she's the custodial parent?
I would imagine. I don't know if she's actually been to court or just spoke with an attorney.
I would advise you do your best to work it out. And if you got to suck it up, I'd suck it up and I'd make an agreement with her and try to work it out and not involve the courts. But, as well as I do, sometimes that's just not possible. In which case, you would actually have to go in there and argue in front of the judge on why you should be allowed to see your child.
My concern was that there is a possibility that the children could go to the state if something couldn't be worked out, I would imagine. I mean, they have an invested interest or belief that they do. I'm thinking it would be in my best interest to put...
Well, but you need to address the matrix.
Make it clear that I have an invested interest in my children.
Yeah, I take offense to you people claiming to have found my son and daughters. And I ain't going to play with you guys. You better give me back my property.
What about establishing that it's my property before they...
Writ of possession, man. What you want to do, this is where, once again, the United States Code, Title 28, Section 1746, you can make your own certificate, your own... Whenever, go read it. It's, you have to read it a few times to understand it. But whenever the law or some rule requires something to be proved or evidenced or satisfied by a certificate under sworn affidavit or whatever, a certificate, it could also be done by unsworn declaration if you use the proper terms, as stated in that section. And you'll notice that it says, if without the United States, I declare under the penalty of perjury under the laws of the United States of America, that the foregoing was true or correct. And if it says, on number 2, it says, if done within the United States, you don't have to swear under the laws of the United States of America. So why you think that's coincidence? That document that you make qualifies as a counter deed. A counter deed defeats a public deed. So you walk in there with your counter deed, you have it signed, you have your ducks in a row on it, and you basically you sign it under penalty of perjury under the laws of the United States of America, and that certificate or that claim or whatever they have to prove their standing, yours trumps it.
Well, they don't have anything except for possession.
Oh yeah, they do. Yeah, they got something. They have the matrix. They have an instrument saying that if it was found as a result of operation of law, that infant's estate was probated. When that infant's estate was probated, it was given to the court. The court then appointed the state as the guardian/trustee. This is what creates the agency. This is what the operation of law which creates the agency. The state then turned around and appointed your mom and dad as the custodial parents and called them mother and father. But make no mistake about it, if you want to know what the contents of your child's birth certificate is, go look at the KRS 213.051, and that's the contents that's on your birth certificate. It may not look like it, but if you think long and hard about it, it's all on there. If you're interested in getting your children back, that's what you need to do. You need to counter deed the matrix, saying, hey, nobody found shit. Then you need to make for a writ of possession in the court for your property. This is one thing I agree with Carl Lentz on. Carl doesn't understand that once, you've entered into a contract with your operating agency, he doesn't understand that part, but he perfectly understands the concept of a writ of possession. And if that's your property and you can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, then you're entitled to a writ of possession.
Well, I was there at the night of conception, so I can prove that much.
This is another thing, aspect when we talk about who we are, where we come from, and, all that whole bit, because who you are and where you come from and where you was born has a lot to do with whether or not a court has jurisdiction over you, don't it? It has everything to do with it, exactly, because, see, if you're operating an entity and you go to court and that entity's being charged and you're operating the entity doing the business in the name, handling that entity's business, well, that creates some legal problems for you.
Well, if you didn't create that entity, how could you possibly know the rules that govern it?
There's no law against being stupid or ignorant, is there?
That's kind of my point.
How they got you was through what they call a ratification of appointment. All right, I can appoint you my trustee, and I can appoint you my executor, but it doesn't take effect till when? No, it takes effect as soon as you accept the appointment.
Right, that's as soon as I can do it.
Right, or you do some act which ratifies the appointment. If I appoint you as my executor, you go down and take money out of my bank account in the name of the executor. Guess who the executor is?
Yeah,
He ratified the appointment. And that's why they got you. They got you doing that through several different ways. Driver's license, registration, votes, things like that.
A summons to court would be one way.
Right. Yeah, we're asking for this entity. We just served the guy we thought was, the guy on file with the Secretary of State. The file with the Secretary of State says the registered agent and registered office here. So we have a charge against this entity. We're taking it to the registered agent because that's where the law tells us to.
And then guess who shows up in court?
Right. Well, you should take that.
But they're not that.
Right. And, you got people up going there, well, I'm a man. I'm a living man. No shit, Sherlock. Who else would be a fucking agent for an entity? A tree?
Preferred way to create an entity.
Well, there's many ways you could do it. If you wanted to group up and form a corporation, if you wanted to create a business trust, go to the Secretary of State and do all this. And what this does is, it allows you to do business, or at least the entity to do business, and you get to enjoy the fruits of that business while maintaining a legal wall between you and the entity, much like a beneficiary does to a trust.
So do you have an entity that you call like John Doe that has your picture ID, or do you even have ID?
I got my declaratory judgment and my affidavit. That's all I carry with me. I don't have no problems. But I go out here, I do business. Everybody I do business with knows me as KW. That's just the way I roll.
So KW administers for ABC Widgets, which is an automobile that's registered in that name, and XYZ Widgets.
I would rather just be a creditor or beneficiary of that entity, and I can accomplish that by giving property to the entity to deal with it for my benefit. And this takes me out of the picture. So when that entity gets charged, I don't have to go to court. Yeah, the entity might lose some of its state for getting sued, but it can never touch me in my private capacity. Never. Only when you're standing up there in a representative capacity. Well, if you're up there, it's like this. Here's what a judge told me one time. He's like, well, you have the right to represent yourself. And I said, objection, Your Honor. I do not need representation. I am present. And he pointed his finger at me. He said, I will hold you in contempt. Because that's what it's all about, is being it. When you go to that court, that's what's going on. Matter of fact, we have Brian here, who's dealing with some issues where it was stated plainly to him that this issue does involve the legal entity. And we come up with a few questions for his counsel on who he thinks he's representing, because his attorney seems to think he's representing three persons. And it's a presumption on the lawyer's part that this entity belongs to you, or that it's your person. You got some evidence that that's my person? Because I got evidence that it belongs to the state.
What name did you use to lien, or what would you suggest name to use to lien?
You go ahead and use your name, but I would spell it in all lowercase. You know, I'm sure you guys have heard of capita, denuncia, and mediuma, and all that shit. That's absolutely true. And what it does is determine your status. And what I mean by your status is, when they run that ID through, they know who you are, where you come from, and what the hell you're doing at. And if you're there as the registered agent, as an agent for a foreign entity, you would be acting as a foreign agent for that foreign entity. So now that you're acting as an agent for a foreign entity, can you go in there in that court and claim all kinds of constitutional rights secured by the laws and Constitution of the United States? Hell no. You can only do that in your individual capacity as a man, as a private man, a private citizen. You go in there and represent in the court in a representative capacity, you're going to bite the bullet every time. But see, as registered agent, you could, let's say somebody's suing you, let's say mortgage in your serve process. Here's what you should do. As soon as you receive that service process or notice or demand, you need to send it straight off to the chief executive office of your state, where the birth certificate is and where you operate, where the birth certificate originated from, the state where that come from. If you wanted to resign, of course, and now think about it, you're taking this Ohio, like in my case, I was taking an Ohio birth certificate, coming here in Kentucky, going to the Department of Commerce, putting this public record showing the organization was organized on the table, giving them a Social Security card. Now, see, the law will view me as what? A foreigner, and I am. You see what I'm saying? I can't come in here and claim rights under the Constitution of Kentucky. Am I stupid? It's only when I was moved in my private capacity as a man was I able to get rid of that. Now, since I was doing business in here in Kentucky, I had to sever that legal relationship. And you do that by resigning. But if you want to get to the point of dissolving the organization, we have to address the chief executive office where that entity was organized and the jurisdiction under which it was organized.
Now, when you say chief executive office, you're just talking the governor's office?
All right. When I say state, I'm referring to the de jure state as the original constitutions as we know them. The state that we call a state as the corporate state is actually not a state. It's actually a private company underneath the executive branch of the government of the state. It's a commercial entity. And it does business and commerce and handles business and commerce with other foreign agents in foreign states. That's their job, is to handle the commerce that goes on in the state. And foreigners, we all know foreigners get taxed, right?
Municipal corporations have Dun & Bradstreet ratings and all that stuff. So, yeah, I know they're totally corporate. Send your presentments to a petty issue like a speeding ticket. Send that off to the executive office. Who does that actually get mailed to? Who is, let's say, the...
It doesn't say that send it to a man. It says
the
chief executive office. Well, this would be the chief executive office of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, which at this time I believe is Steve Beshear, who is able to act in the capacity of two persons, one being the chief magistrate of the de jure state, and the other being the chief executive officer of the company under the executive branch, which is acts in a commercial capacity.
Gotcha. So the probably generally, typically referred to as governor.
That office, yeah.
In relation to what a previous gentleman was discussing, child-related issues, the so-called state, these pirates, they, grab someone's children, and you were talking about how they're invested, in financial markets, birth certificates, and all that stuff. Well, I'm having an issue with is birth certificates are not identification documents, so they have some certificate with just a name on it, and then they grab some children. It's like, how can they possibly tie the two together? Because there's no way you can identify anyone just by a piece of paper.
Because the infant who was of unknown parentage, all right, this is where it comes from. This is the matrix that causes all your problems. And you're going to have these problems until you address the matrix and get out of the matrix. Well, what is the matrix? Well, that's the original protocol of an instrument from which all copies must be made. So when you're looking at your birth certificate there, that's not a birth certificate. That's just merely a copy of the matrix. Right, and this record shows the organization was organized. Truth is that the entity of the real boy or girl is actually considered the property and the state of the agency. See, involuntary servitude voluntary servitude is perfectly legal.
Curious, how can they legitimately grab some random children, and they are random because, like I said, they can claim whatever they want with whatever interest they want with some with the birth certificate and whatever financial shenanigans are going on behind the scenes in regards to it. But how can they possibly tie that to any particular child?
Why the Inspector General said that 100% of all federal fugitives and 80% of all drug trafficking is associated with false identification. Yes, the truth is that this birth certificate proves the agency was organized. Well, this organization's value was derived from this infant. And make no mistake about it, they consider that infant the property of the state. They're the creditor of the state. They have a security interest in the collateral of that agency. It's business. It's nothing personal.
Get it. I'm just saying that how do they know, which child do we grab, because we supposed to...
Well, usually they have the best witness in the world, which is a confessing defendant.
If it's an infant, let's say it's actually a real infant who can't speak for himself, well, the child obviously can't identify himself and say something stupid. That's my birth certificate, that's my name. Well,
here's what they would do. Most of the time, if social services or CPS is showing up to your house, it's usually based on some information, right? So they come up and they want to do an investigation. We want to see the children, make sure they're okay. Can they do that? Nope.
Of course not.
Do it anyway. As soon as they're let into the home, as soon as they start talking, must be you waive your rights. You know what I'm saying? So what they'll do is they'll go find out the names of the children. And usually they don't take them on the spot, do they? They usually go away and come back. Okay, well, the reason is because they're going to go down and see what the status of that child is, and they're going to run the name. Once they have that child's name, they are able to determine whether or not that child is a ward of the state. And remember when I told you the contents of your birth certificate it says the person who assumes the custody of a live-born infant of unknown parentage shall report on the form to the state registrar within so many days following information. And here's the information on your birth certificate. If you don't believe me, go look at the 213.051 of the Kentucky Revised Statutes, which has the title head, Contents of Birth Certificate. And here's what's on your birth certificate. The date and place of the finding, the approximate birthday of the child, race or color of the child, to whom the child was given for custody and care, the name given to the child by the custodian of the child. And the reason they're able to come in and take this child away from them because the record shows that the state found it, and you're just a custodian, the custodial parent. If I give something to you to take care of, do I need a reason to come take it?
No, because it's yours to begin with.
If you're the custodian, right, that's because you have not addressed the claim or the matrix because they've made their claim. They say they found that infant and they placed it into your custody for care.
Yeah, you're not rebutting it.
Custodian. That's right. You're not, and they have a certificate over there. Well, there's no reason why you can't make your own certificate over there that says, yes, I do recognize my son and daughter as legitimate, and no, they were not found. Now, this throws a wrench into their things. But if we're not going to address that issue, the matrix, in that situation, you're going to have problems because the record shows, and if you were a judge, would you judge according to what was on the record and evidence, or would you judge based on what somebody said?
No, definitely, obviously, what's in the record and evidence.
Okay, well, the judge in the court has on record that this child is a ward of the state, found by the state, and was given to this couple right here as custodians. And for some reason, the state has decided to take that child away from the custodians. Can the state do that?
Oh, yeah, if there's nothing else to rebut the presumptions there in that record.
There you go. And that's how they do it. And they're claiming... Go ahead.
KW, one thing that on like the birth certificates, even is how they have the mother sign as under informant. I'm looking at mine right now, and it says informant, and my mother is the one that signed it. And then the other thing that's even funny is they have the date of birth, but it's not received to the county or that for at least 4 to 5 days. So if nobody claims that child, then it's considered lost, like you're saying.
Yeah, and not only that, if you're an infant of unknown parentage, can you be the posterity of the people?
No.
If you're an infant of unknown parentage, from who can you inherit?
No one.
It's to see that you're an infant of unknown parentage found by the state. How are you going to pay your food and necessary bills? This is one of the exceptions when we talk about contracts with infants. The state didn't create a trust. What it did is create an enterprise and granted you an estate in it. This is why you'll hear Congress refer to it as a citizen of the United States as a civilly dead entity operating as co-beneficiary and co-trustee. Well, this is how it works. You know, this is the entity they're talking about. In order to address issues concerning family courts, first thing first, never apply for a benefit from the state because it's not a benefit. It's a loan. They have just become the creditor and have invested in this child with the hopes that this agency, the taxpayer / vessel / entity, they will get a return on. Now think about this for a second. Let's talk about Michael Jordan. Let's talk about the man who paid for Michael Jordan's schooling and his necessaries. You think he made a big return off investing in the state agency called Michael Jordan? You bet he ass did, and that's how it works. It's all based on an individual basis, the return on the thing. This is why they go back there and run their name. If you're producing good, like, you'll see that rich people get off and people that have good jobs and paying good taxes, they get off because they're providing value and energy to their system, so they enjoy the limited liability.
So when the cops come out and are responding to a 9/11 call and you're asking for help, they're not out there to, let's say, help you, the man. They're just coming. The system is there to protect the value it is accruing in you.
Right.
Checking for collateral damage.
Yes. And if need be, they'll draft you.
Of course, that's still by consent. I mean, they can't forcibly do it, but they just figure you won't know that.
Right.
KW, you said earlier, Kate, two things. Is it Hollins versus Briars? Is that the correct?
Yeah, it's either Hollins versus Byers or Hollins versus Briars or something like that. But just type in Realm of Caesar, Statutes of Commonwealth of Kentucky, and you should find it.
And you said a counter deed defeats a public deed. You want to expound on that a little bit for all of us?
You just go look at the dictionary, law dictionary under counter deed, and it's a private deed under seal which destroys a public deed. Because, see, you're the witness. You was there. Your certificate, your record show it has more standing than the registrar's. He wasn't there. His record indeed stands until a counter deed is presented.
So pretty much most everything in the public is just a presumption.
Well, no. You go to public school?
Yeah.
But who paid for that?
Well, if you're taking an organization, the so-called government or whatever, at some level.
And where they get their money?
From all the poor saps out there that they're taxing, bankers and people that tax.
Yeah. Right. Well, from the bankers who loaned the money, as long as they got the security interest in some collateral that backs up the loan in case the loan defaults. This is where they put us. Not everybody shares this condition and this status. It was just us, and a lot of it has to do with who you are, who your mom and dad was, and how far back you go here in America. Now, a lot of people don't want to believe that, but I know for a fact that it is true. Depending on when you come to this country or when your ancestors come to this country, it has a lot to do with your status.
They actually keep track of that?
Well, absolutely. They got everybody over the boat. They got $10 off of them. And they got the records, and they can do what state they went to. Look, you got all the genealogy sites, don't you? They can take that shit how far back. Right, but don't think the county doesn't keep tabs on that shit too, and has been from the very beginning. They know who comes into their county. They know where they live because they're supposed to come and register and do all this and all that. They know who the original people are who own the land in that county. Like here in Pulaski County, there's a few freeholders living here. Then there's the ones holding the copy holds, and then there's a little municipal corporation called City of Somerset, which sits on land leased by the United States and is created for citizens of the United States to do business. And if you want to know what kind of where your domicile or your place of vote is, called the police. If the police show up, then the corporation, you're living inside corporation property and corporation jurisdiction. If the sheriff shows up, then you're in an unincorporated area, and there's a good chance you probably have at least a copy hold in your land.
I just figured, I knew such records existed. I just figured for the usual legal purposes, they don't go digging into that, to determine whether to throw the book at you or not, so to speak, If they want to fine you, they just go by what the statutes say for, let's say, an offense or whatever, whether or not to let you off easy, like you say, like they do with rich people. I figured that they weren't actually looking that deep in anyone's background,
Yes, they are. Bet your ass when they come in there, they got every file on you that's since day one, man.
Yeah, I could understand the financial records, like they could easily access, financial records and such. But as to your genealogy, I didn't think they'd have that at their fingertips and say,
yeah.
this guy's been here, his family goes back, 300 years. Let's go easy on him. I didn't know that.
Oh, absolutely. It would depend on if the records in the court reflect that. You know what I'm saying? The actual freeholders of the county and the land, they're the people who run the courts. They keep track of who's who. They know if you're one of them or if you're an outsider. And if you go look at Hamilton County, Ohio's probate court website, and you can get that at probatect.org, go peek around in there and look at all the nice records they keep in there. They know everything, dude. Everything about you, about your mom, about your children, about your dad, about everything. And every time your case comes up there in front of that court, don't think they don't know fucking everything about you.
That's a true statement.
Yeah, I just figured that someone's genealogy and whatnot at their fingertips. I figured that was like on a federal, either CIA, NSA level. I didn't think it was like on a local county level that they kept that stuff at their fingertips.
Where do you think the CIA and everybody in the United States gets all their information?
I can say over the last 5 years myself, I had driving issues, and at one point in time, the city that I live in, they kept harassing me. Well, the state prosecuted one time and chose after that not to prosecute me again. Then the city brought me in 3 more times, and the state told them, you can prosecute him yourself. And they got all bent out of shape. They said, well, we got a contract with you to prosecute him, prosecute our cases. And they said, yeah, you're right, but we're not prosecuting that one. And they let me, and the city had to do it, and they got a retired judge, or a judge that was getting ready to retire, to basically throw the book at me. And the judge got pissed at me because he tried telling me I can put you away for a year. Looked at him, and I said, no, you can't. And I said, state statute says 14 days. And he got pissed because I was right.
Well, a lot of people will say, well, they don't, for some reason they think statutes has got sticky shit all over it. And, don't never address the statutes, man, they'll get you. If you want these judges and agents and officials to do the things you want them to do, you need to use those statutes because they are bound by those statutes. And that's the only way and authority that they have. When you show up in a town and you go and you register and you become a service agent process, this gives you a whole different status in that state. And it doesn't make a difference if you're operating an entity from the United States or an entity from one of the other several states of the American Union, or that you're operating an entity from Russia. It's irrelevant. Kentucky is a sovereign state, and all other states are foreign to it. So if I'm operating any entity created by anyone other than Kentucky, I'm a foreigner. And this is the thing that you need to address is the whole unknown parentage thing. Once you've addressed the matrix and you've canceled and beat the matrix out with your counter deed and your own certificate, now they don't have the record and evidence to say, hey, he's operating an agency. Hey, he's an agent for a foreign entity. Hey, he's not entitled to the constitutional rights. Hey, he's not entitled to the rights of our statute. No, now you've put yourself into as a private citizen, a private man. And this is the status that the Constitution and the laws protect. They do not protect entities, per se. They rape the shit out of them.
That makes sense. I mean, because in the end, these entities are just basically figments of our imagination. I mean, they're not living people. They're just things on paper. Even though they try to tie it down to, living people, but in the end, they're not.
They can form their own society. Maybe they offered you a part in their society. But see, they already had the king and all the other important positions sewed up in their society. You know what a billet is?
Is this something military related?
Yeah, in a company, in a platoon, and all on the different sizes, scales of military companies, there's called billets, and the billets have to be filled. And the billet might call for one lieutenant and one master sergeant and 2 petty officers and 3 of these officers and 4 of these officers and 60, you know what I'm saying? All the different rates and skills. When you joined their society, they had all the good billets done took up, and the only thing that you could do in their society was operate one of their agencies. Now, we won't give you rights under the Constitution, but we'll give you rights in commerce. So that if one of our free men have a contract with you, we'll make our free men uphold that contract with you. And this is the status derived from the 14th Amendment and the New Deal. It's, as you were born of unknown parentage, you have no person. You're not the posterity of people, so we're going to give you a status like this. And you're not going to enjoy the rights under the Constitution because it says for ourselves and our posterity. But we're going to give you commercial rights.
This goes back to a point when my husband and I were being released from prison at different times, and I had already gone out to a halfway house, and we were being told by the parole office that we could not cohabit. And I had written an affidavit, referenced when we got married, that we had a contract to be together. I annexed a certified copy of the marriage license to it, and I sent it to some of the parties. So when he got out, I was amazed. I called. I happened to know the name of the guy who was running the parole officer, and I just called and said, I'd like to speak to Mike, whatever his name was, please. And they put me right through, and I said, I'm calling regarding my husband, Paul. And he said, and Paul was right then in an office being told, you will not call her for 3 months. You cannot live together. You cannot see her, blah, blah, blah. And I said, do you recall getting an affidavit from me regarding our marriage? And he said, I might have seen something like that. And I said, well, then I just have one question for you. Can you tell me the law under which you can force a divorce? And he got real quiet, and he said, well, hold the line. He came back in about 10 minutes, and he said, your husband is going to be living with you, and everything had changed from what they were telling my husband at the same time in an office. So that the point was what you said about creating your own document. And I had taken that document and put it in the public record. I would do it a little differently now than I did it then because when you put a wedding document in the public record, they can enclose it and take it over. If you put a copy of that document in with a wedding signature that you acknowledge it's a true and correct copy, then they cannot enclose it. But the issue was dealt with. It was really serendipity that I got right through to the head of the office, and it was dealt with in 10 minutes. I just wanted to confirm what you have to say about writing up a document and doing your thing.
Because they're making all kinds of claims, making all kinds of statements, and people are certifying things they have no knowledge about.
Right, and I had knowledge about it. I attended the wedding.
Yes. Yes.
I made a commitment.
The thing, you don't need a license to get married. What you do need is you need a license in order for the court to be able to enforce the contract of your marriage by the state. In truth, the marriage actually is between the two entities. And
I realize there's a lot of information out there that you are bringing a third party into your marriage.
Anytime two entities merge together, it has to be approved, right? Like if Bank of America and somebody else is going to merge together and become one, it has to be approved. They have to be licensed to do that. Where you come in. Of course, it's a perverted way of looking at things, but it has served them very well for many years.
But, in this instance, I was able to take the facts and make them serve our situation.
Once you have a document and a counter deed which conflicts and makes sure it's void, well, they can no longer use that public record against you. And that's what they got to have against you, is they got to have a record. They got to have information. Which if you go check that out, do the word search on that, that's information and an accusation of a crime. That's why your mom was an informant. What was the crime? Somebody abandoned her infant.
Do you know if anybody has used this to do the counter deed against the deed of trust for a mortgage?
The whole way I would address a mortgage is like this. As soon as I received the service of process, notice or demand, I would send it to the chief executive office. I would show up to court. If nobody attorney showed up on behalf of that entity to show up to court, I would inform the judge who I am. Judge, yes, I am the registered agent for service of process of that entity, and according to this statute, my only obligation was to forward to the entity the service notice of demand. Now, however, Judge, the mortgagee is claiming that I am a debtor, all right? You have to know that this entity exists. You really have to do it. You have to articulate yourself when you talk about it. The truth is they don't have a title. All they have is what's called color of title based on the certified statements that they have made. But see, their certified statements, unless it says what it says applies with 28 U.S.C. 1746, they're open to attack. The affidavits, the certifications, all that stuff's open to attack. As soon as they go try to admit it into the court, you want to object to it. Another thing is about this is you tell the judge that, hey, I would be happy to pay the debt. All I got to have is a bill. My principal will not pay as a debt. So if the mortgage company is saying I owe $150,000, Judge, I just need a bill and I'll pay it. But the only way I'm paying it is in exchange for the note. Because the law says you're entitled to that note when you pay it.
Hey, KW, wouldn't that be a good time to put your claim for your equity on there or your agent's lien as well on that record?
Absolutely. Once you see the service process, if the principal's not upholding his obligations, now the agent can seize the property of the agent, of the agency. And as a matter of fact, when the principal, and this is, I just went over one aspect of it tonight, and this is just concerning the separation of the legal relationship. There's a whole other way to operate the agency if you wish to do so. The books I would advise you to read is a book called Human Beings and the Law of Agency. It's an awesome book. You'll be like, holy shit. And another book is called A Treatise on the Law of Agency. And the agent has a lot of leeway in certain circumstances and under certain conditions. For instance, if the agent cannot find his principal or locate his principal, guess who gets to take over as the executor of the estate of the agency?
The agent?
Absolutely. And guess who is going to assist him in the settlement of the estate of that agency?
What, the
court.
state? Oh, the court?
Court.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now, keep in mind, yes, the state has courts, but there are other courts that are here that are not subject to the state. They have their own jurisdiction, and don't get it from no state or no constitution. And this is what people refer to as the superior court. All the courts, even the Supreme Court, is inferior to the superior court. Let me expand on that a little bit. The superior court was commonly called the King's Bench. Of course, here in America, we have no king, right?
Mm-hmm.
The individual people are sovereigns with no one that governs, okay? Well, that's how you have to look at it. That's the King's Bench, the Superior Court. Well, when you invoke the Superior Court and you go in a non-representative capacity, who's present in that court? The sovereign, that's right. And guess who gets to determine the capacity to sue or be sued?
You do, sovereign.
That's right. But you can never be sovereign if you're there in a representative capacity, can you?
So a state, let's say, a state of whatever, they would have, let's say, a state Supreme Court, but they would also have a superior court?
But they're not used. As a matter of fact, you started seeing them fall out of use around the early 40s. Seen less and less cases. You go back to the late 1800s, mid-1800s, all the way up to the early 1900s, you still see cases, captioned in the superior court. You get up to 1940s, 50s, 60s, you don't see that no more.
What does one go about convening superior court? I mean,
you set the jurisdiction of the court and type court is by your caption.
You were in jurisdiction established by the one creating the complaint or petition or whatever you put in the court.
Yeah. The complaint sets the jurisdiction of the plaintiff, don't he?
Yes.
You will never be brought into court on the defensive side of the superior court because they can't get you that way. They have no standing in a superior court, so they have to bring you under their agency and their regulations and codes. That's how they get you into court, because you're operating the agency. If you're going to operate my agency and my vessel, whose rule? If you're going to be my employee, my agent, whose rules you got to follow?
Obviously yours.
Is that fair?
It's very clear, very fair.
Now, say you don't like working for me because every day you come to work, I find you for this. Maybe I find you for speeding on the forklift, or I find you for not filling out the paperwork, and maybe, matter of fact, you did something where I had to detain you for a minute, and you keep showing up to court, and every day you keep on showing up to work. Whose fault is that?
Mine. Because if I don't like it, I could just quit and resign.
That's right, and that's what you do when you don't want to operate that entity no more. But keep in mind that there's some consequences to that. Because that's very important, because they refer to this as the creation of remedy, and they also state on, and here's another fact about the declaratory judgment, that any statute, law, or rule, or anything in conflict with your declaratory judgment is repealed. Let me say that again. All statutes, laws, and rules in conflict with your declaratory judgment are repealed. So if you have a declaratory judgment that says you don't have to have a license,
well, the DMV can go pound salt.
That's right. That statute's been repealed as far as you're concerned. And guess who repealed it?
You did.
You did. Because guess who's the all-powerful and all-knowing, and guess who has all the rights?
Yeah, you do. We do. We just have to have the knowledge and wisdom to be able to exercise it.
Yeah, you have to know what's going on, and you have to be able to articulate your argument in such a way that it's reasonable, it's logical, and it can be understood by most people. You go into court and you holler all this crazy, I have heard some crazy shit. I even heard one guy talking about DNA and afterbirth and all this stuff. Up there, if I was sitting up there as a judge, I'd get upset too, man. I ain't got time for this shit, man. I got a caseload the size of a dump truck, and I got to get through this shit. I ain't got time to sit here and deal with this idiot.
So it'd be safe to say you could use a declaratory judgment against a void judgment that's already been issued?
Let's say, for instance, I believe you're the one that said something about the mortgage. Are you dealing with a mortgage case?
No, what I'm dealing with is an eminent domain case.
You just make sure you get paid when they take it from you, because they can take it, because it's not your property. It's in the name of the agency. And this isn't, I'm just speaking generally. This may not apply specifically to you, but in general, all the property is in the name of the state agencies, thus in the name of the state. There are still some areas, in the states, that are not. They're still private lands. And this is another thing that which plays a part as far as jurisdiction goes. It also plays a part where you live. Here in Kentucky, it's a private land state. If you go north of the Ohio River, it's commonly referred to as the Northwest Territory. This is all public land states. Take the Louisiana Purchase. The United States purchased that land. So tell me, who's the owner of that land?
United States.
And who holds the fee simple title?
They do. Yeah, U.S.
All right. That's right. And they granted you a patent or a freehold. You should die without heirs or assigns. Who does the land go back to?
It goes back to the state, or the United States or whatever.
That's right.
In Texas, the land is supposedly belongs to the people.
Yes, Texas is different. This is what I was saying about it depends. Where you at? Because you're living in Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Northwest Territory, or if you're living on the lands of the Louisiana Purchase, guess whose jurisdiction you fall under?
Ultimately, the feds.
That's right,
US,
because who owns that land?
Presumably they do.
Right, but however, when the patent is given, or the freehold given, it's usually given to their heirs and assigns forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a good thing to have, because that's the next best title you have next to fee simple, or bill of sale, as you might call it. And that's what the United States has for the Northwest Territory and the Louisiana Purchase, is they have a bill of sale proving that they're the fee simple owners. Can they dictate what the rules are on their own land if we're doing business and commerce on their own land?
Yes. I guess so.
And can they do it legally? It's like you have this cattle ranch up spot. Even though these cattle ranches up there in Nevada going on and everything, these people have no concept of the law or what the Constitution is, and they're going to get somebody hurt up there doing all this crazy shit they're doing. When they say that land is public land, that land was either bought or leased by the United States, and it belongs to the United States. And we have this rancher sitting there trying to get these cows to go graze on the land. People would say that the feds are acting unconstitutional and doing it. No, they're acting within the legality of this. It's just that the old cowboys don't understand what the hell is going on. They probably never will.
Now, most likely, would you say that the original 13 colony states are private land states?
All private land states, yes.
Yeah, because I noticed up here, Connecticut, as far as I know, I think Massachusetts as well, if I remember correctly, we don't have BLM folks running around.
Nope. And either we have them here in Kentucky, either we have them anywhere else, which is in a private land state, because all these lands were owned by private people.
Yeah, same way in Texas. We have our own land office.
Yes. Kentucky has their own land office. But where you see the public lands, this is all the different situations. This is why I say, this is why they don't like people giving legal advice. And this is why I would advise anyone that if they don't fully comprehend the situation they're in, they probably should seek competent legal counsel. Some people on TalkShoe and some people on Skype should not be giving legal advice because they have no understanding of the legality, the legal issues, and legal relationships at play. I can't give you legal advice. I don't know what kind of contracts you've entered into. I don't know what your status is. And it's going to be different for you. It's going to be different for the guy living in Texas, from the guy living in Illinois, to the guy living in Kentucky, to the guy living in Nevada. It's going to be a different circumstances and therefore different legal issues that need to be presented for that case. But the one thing we always want to remember is that we want to be in that court at all times in a non-representative capacity. All times. Make sure you file that notice to appear. If you haven't been to court yet, you got service process, send that service process off to the Chief Executive Office, and when you show up to court, make sure you file that notice to appear by special appearance in a non-representative capacity. If you've already shown up to court, make sure you withdraw your appearance in a representative capacity and fill out a notice to appear in a non-representative capacity. Because what you do when you do that is you change the rules of the game.
So you address the void judgment.
Trustee is an indispensable party to the proceedings. So if they're going to be charging a legal entity, the trustee has to be there. You can't be trustee. Why?
Non-representative capacity. Yep. I see how this, resigning as an agent for the organization, helps you in, let's say, your typical court situation, and you put out notices of this to the appropriate state agencies, and you might get on some, we have no jurisdiction kind of list. How do you address the usual everyday issues like utility bills and all that, because that's all state agency business as well. I mean, that name is...
Absolutely, and let me give you an example of how this works. Let's say somebody has an electric bill, they can't pay it, and they get a notice of a shut-off notice, right?
Right.
Well, some people may know that you could take that down to an office somewhere in your town or something, and somebody will help you pay it. All right, well, here in this county, well, that company that does that little agency that does that, is directly under the chief executive office. He's under the governor's office of the state. So, but remember that you can only send service of process, notice, or demand to him. That's your job, not anything else. If you receive a notice or demand, that, and this is where you talk about getting it for accepted for value concept, why you get people saying, well, you should be able to accept it for value. No, you're not qualified. You're not trained to do that shit. Your only job is to forward it to your fucking principal. Don't go in there handling that shit yourself. That's right. That's right. You're just a doorman. The doorman's a trustee. But his only obligation is to what? Open and close the door.
Your thing is that there's, say, an entity or whatever within each town or county that does this sort of thing, or is it a state-level position, like, say, the comptroller?
I would say it's tied into all that. The research I did on the little agency down here that does it ties straight to the chief executive office. And anytime you got a notice of a shut-off, you can take your notice down there, shut off, and they were provided a certain amount of funds, and usually they would pay it. Perhaps the proper way to do this is to send that, like if somebody sends you a demand.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I demand this from you. Well, what are you supposed to do with it? Well, the statutes tell you, registered agent, to forward it to the entity. That's your job. That's your own obligation, and that's all it says. Obligations of registered agent. Forward to the entity for which you are the registered to any service, process, or notice or demand. That's your obligation to the registered agent. This falls in line with HJR 192, Public Law 73, 73-110 or whatever it is, and
73
statute 48 Stat 11, 48 Stat 4811, I think it is.
And supposedly it's also codified in the U.S. Code somewhere as well.
Right, it is, in Title 31, under the Go Clause. And if you go read the clause title in there, it tells that nobody can demand money from a United States agency.
Yeah, like they can't demand money in any particular kind of coin or currency. They can't demand a particular form of it or something like that. Now, is that
this is why you all see when they send you a bill, they never ask for dollars. They just put a number down there. because they can't demand no dollars from you.
Is that also why they also often on the bills they put the dollar amount in a box, like so that it's like a separate document?
Yes. Well, if you notice, and I noticed this on the car statements for a car loan, that at the bottom of every statement they send you the payment for it at the bottom, and if you turn that little thing over, it'll say coupon. Well, that's what you're supposed to be sending to the chief executive office. And he's the one that's supposed to be accepting it for value and discharging it, not you.
That's only if you want to be the agent to represent the property of the United States or the particular state.
Right, because there's lots of benefits involved in the operation of this agency.
Being a company man, so to speak.
There's billable hours, huh?
Yeah.
The thing about the, let's say, HR 192 and however it's been reworded over the years, that they can't demand payment of an obligation in a particular kind of coin or currency, is that set in stone across the board, or is it a case as long as there's not a pre-existing agreement in place to pay?
It also depends on whether you're talking about internally with the government of the United States or you're talking refer to its commerce with foreign nations. See, because when we talk about the United States went bankrupt, here's what happened is that they did not have enough gold to pay off the foreign creditors and the depositors in the bank. So what they decided to do was gather up all the gold and pay their foreign creditors instead of those debt. This is why the United States is one of the best full faith and credit standings when it comes to other countries investing in our country, is that we've always paid our debts. They robbed them from us to pay them.
And so they had to compensate us.
Yes, they had to give us some valuable consideration. When they take an eminent domain, they got to give you compensation, but they got another term for it.
Quid pro quo.
Yeah, they have to give you something. And this is why I believe they created the agency, so that it would help you do the debt. But when they did this is when they tied in the unknown parentage thing, because by claiming you were an infant of unknown parentage, what they really did was steal your birthright to the protection of the laws, those rights secured by the laws of the United States and the Constitution. They stole your birthright.
Right, they knew it was rightfully ours. They needed some gimmick to keep it, to justify keeping it for themselves.
Right, because they didn't want you to have your person, which they had no control over. They wanted to give you a person they had control over. It's all tied to the Bible. When we talk about the Bible, let's look at Jesus. Everybody wants to talk about Jesus, okay? Well, believe it or not, Jesus was an illegitimate child and an infant of unknown parentage when he was born, according to the law. Was he not? Do you think that's a coincidence? And as a result that you being this pauper and infant of unknown parentage, you have no person, you're actually what they call civilly dead. And this is why you have to believe in Jesus Christ in order to be saved. It's because if Jesus Christ didn't come back from the dead, how in the hell are you going to do it?
Earlier as well mentioned, the Bible, if you kind of view it, if you understand legal terms and you view it in that light, it brings out a whole new meaning. I've learned a little bit about that myself. My friend and I were discussing this sort of thing. We heard one of Winston Stroud's videos, and he said something like the Bible is a law book. Particularly King James Bible is a law book. And that kind of echoed with something that kind of reminded me of something that happened when I was young. When I went to church, I don't know how many years ago, when I was a child, I found a bunch of leaflets in the pews, and they had a peculiar variation of the Lord's Prayer. It read more in a legal commercial sense. They, instead of, forgive us our sins, said forgive us our debtors or something like that. It was kind of weird. Yes. And I remember that even as a child, I knew there's something going on here because it's specifically peculiar. There was something about it, but of course I didn't have the knowledge to understand it at the time, so I filed it away. And so Winston said, okay, the Bible's a law book. I was like, ding, 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 the lights went off. So I was talking to my friend, and he said, why don't we run this by Michelle, this attorney that we know? And she said, it's funny that we thought that, that we had this idea that the Bible's a law book because being an attorney, she's been in judges' chambers many times, and she's found that a lot of these guys apparently have attended seminary. These guys, well,
let me explain to you something about that Bible, as in the context of a law book. King James wrote the authorized version, and had it written, and distributed to all the judges and all the lawyers. As a matter of fact, the Bible was the law book for the common law. And if you go back and look at Bouvier, they'll tell you that Christianity is a part of the common law. So yes, Christianity is a fundamental part of common law. Common law. This is the once you enter into the realm of Caesar, when you start talking about entities, this is when a different thing takes over. This is different rules, different sort of things played. But that Bible is written in the King's English, and the King's English is legalese. And up until the Civil War, when you went into the court, there was only one law book sitting on that judge's desk.
That's right. That was the Bible, huh?
You damn straight. One more thing, Daniel, I want to discuss about civil law. Civil law has three branches. It has criminal, military, and ecclesiastical. If you're in a civil suit, it has to do one of those things. What is the crime you're actually being accused of in there? It's probably most likely fraud for breach of contract, such as operating agency without using a seatbelt. In the realm of Caesar concerning entities, it's different when you jump over here in the kingdom of God. You got the realm of Caesar, and then you have the realm of God.
There's a whole other aspect to this thing, this game that they're playing. There's a whole theological aspect to it.
Oh, absolutely. If you haven't figured that out yet, you need to do a lot more reading. I would go read some of the older law books, such as Bouvier from the 1800s and different constitutions. It's like there's actually one part in the Constitution of North Carolina where it says that white men shall not lie down with mankind. And it clearly made a distinction between the so-called white man and those called mankind.
Oh, that's interesting. Because the way we use the term today, the term mankind is just generic, but it probably must have had a specific meaning back then.
Oh, yeah, it was a lower beast, lower than... Yeah, and this was in the Constitution, one of the original Constitutions. But keep in mind that before these colonies revolted, they had constitutions. They had parliaments. They had legislatures.
You had mentioned about sending your bills to the birth state for the chief executive officer. If you're domiciled in one state and your birth certificate's in another.
Let me tell you a little story I had. Maybe this might help explain it. One of the experiments I did when I started discovering what this was is I went down to the courthouse and I put my birth certificate on the table along with my affidavit, and I asked for a license. And the lady took it. She went over there and sat down. She read my birth certificate, typed a few things in the computer. She then pulled my affidavit, which stated that I don't use no numbers and I refuse to be identified by any numbers, and using a number is against my religious belief, and I'm not operating any entity or any agency, and nor will I be responsible for any entity or agency. After she started reading my affidavit, she jumped up. Well, actually, she wrote down on a Post-it, the little yellow Post-it pad, and she pulled it off, and she went walking by another lady's desk, and she stopped to put the note right on that lady's desk as she walked by and walked back into this room. And when this lady got the note, she looked at it, and she jumped up, and she went into the back room. I was like, oh, shit. So when they come back out about 10, 12 minutes later, they said they're not going to be able to give me a license or identification. And I was like, well, why? It was like, well, we just can't. I said, and this when I heard them have the birth certificate up in front of Circuit Court Clerk Treatise Van Zandt, and I said, well, this isn't me, is it? She said, no. And I said, this is an organization, isn't it? She said, yes, it's a state agency. And this is also where I said, well, if I use this, I said, I'm not statutes of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Now, when I said this, he said, I've said too much, and I don't want to get any word. Maybe you should go talk to an attorney. But while she was sitting there saying that, her clerk behind her was sitting there shaking her head no. And she's absolutely right. As long as I don't use that entity, I am not subject to the provisions of the Kentucky Revised Statutes. I am only subject to the Penal Code.
Oh, consequences.
Oh, yeah, consequences. Yeah, man, because there are always consequences. Let me tell you a little story about a little county here in eastern Kentucky which decided to secede from the United States. I forget the exact name of the county, but they did. They seceded from the United States. But however, when the inhabitants of that county and the citizens of that county went to go do business with other counties and try to purchase their liquor and their goods and their services, the other county said, fuck off. Well, it wasn't soon thereafter that county rescinded its succession movement and rejoined the United States. Keep in mind that the United States is a society and its people vote for itself and they decide what's best. And if they decide it's best not to do business with you unless you operate an agency, guess what?
Yes,
they have that right. They have that right. That doesn't mean you can't still do business with men. And that still doesn't mean you can't go out and buy property. If there was a home for sale for $120,000, if I had $120,000 cash, do you think I need an ID to buy that house?
Nope.
Nope. Cash is king.
Cash is king. When Donald Trump goes in to sign some contracts or paper, you think they ask for his ID?
No.
That's because he's made his own name. The thing about the declaratory judgment is that any person interested as an executor or as a trustee of an estate or an entity's estate may require the court's assistance in directing any of his subordinates and agents do or abstain from doing any particular act. And this is very important because you won't see this in the statutes. It's there, but it's not written as clear as it is in the actual act itself. But like I said, I would just type in Declaratory Judgments Act, PDF, and you should be able to get that. Overlook that thing because that was created for you, the man, okay? This was created so that you could bring an action and find out what your legal obligations, rights, and duties are in respect to any other person or party, including the state. So if the state says you have to have a license, you say, well, no, I don't. Well, that's a controversy. And you have the right to go in front of a court and bring the state into the court and have the court determine what your rights and duties and obligations are, if any. Declaratory Judgments PDF and Kentucky Revised Statutes is Chapter 418, if you wanted to go look that over. But your state statute has the same thing, too. It's a uniform law passed. The other thing about the agency, the government agency / state agency / vessel, these entities, it's very important to understand that these entities can do those things. That in order for any entity to do anything, it must be done by agent. And if you examine the situation and you understand that birth certificate represents the birth of an entity and in no way, shape, or form can identify you, because this is why the Inspector General said 100% of federal fugitives are associated with false identification. Think about what the Inspector General is saying there. 100% of all federal fugitives are associated with false identification. The gravity of that statement alone should sit there and open your eyes up. So when we examine our relationship to this, well, it can only be that of the registered agent, because all entities must have a registered agent and a registered office in order to conduct commerce here in the state. It must have. And if not, if you're out there operating that entity without a license and you get pulled over and you give that entity's name and you give that entity's date of birth, are you falsely identifying yourself? You bet your ass you are.
What if you've got a DBA in that name?
The whole DBA, well, first of all, it's not your name. It's the legal name of the registered organization. It's the name of the beast. Your birth certificate is a mark. Here, let me go over a couple of definitions for you. Mark, the evidence, token, or proof. Date. Date specifically refers to when an instrument takes effect. And if you go look at the word date in the law dictionary, it has nothing to do about a day. It all pertains to an instrument, on which day it takes effect, or upon some condition of the term of the contract, something is supposed to take effect. That's a date. It's a strict reference to an instrument. So when I ask you what your date of birth is, your immediate answer is say, well, I don't have one. You know, and it's all these little words that they use on there that get us in trouble. And it's really simple. I've seen guys talk to police and they think they're so smart, you know, that they can actually out-talk the police. And they always get themselves in trouble. Look, it's a simple question. Am I under arrest? No. Am I free to go? Oh, I'm not free to go? Oh, I am under arrest. I'm invoking my right to remain silent. And you sit there and you shut up and you don't say a damn thing to nobody, because this is what the officer needs in order to prosecute you. He needs information.
Yes.
And without that information, he cannot proceed unless he has witnessed you commit a crime.
Or he's got a warrant, or breach of the peace.
Well, how does he know about the warrant? He may presume that I'm that person or I'm the trustee of that person, but when I have that document saying I resigned from the agency, sent the letter of resignation in, resigning from the appointment of agency, well, then he has no standing. I don't give a fuck who he goes takes that warrant to. Thanks for letting me come on and talk with you guys. I appreciate it. And if you want me to be on again next Sunday, I'll get with you next couple of days and see what I can work out.
Sounds good, KW. Much appreciated.
It's all about what you want is when they run your name through that computer, it comes back and it says no jurisdiction.
Revolution News and Information. Have a good night.